Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. I'm Judy Mielke. I'm the speaker today for Inago's webinar. And today we will be talking about grant writing. I'm so glad you can join us. So yeah, let's get started. So um, I'm Judy Mielke. I'm the founder of Scientify Research. We are an award-winning research services company based in Stockholm, Sweden. And our mission is to empower researchers worldwide with research funding information. And why do we do this? Well, Kate and I have been working in academic publishing and also as researchers for over 20 years. And one thing that we have noticed is that research funding is the most important part. It's the fundamental part of all research. And it is something that in order for great research to be done, funding is needed. And so our mission when we launched the company is to empower researchers with research funding information and thereby enable the best research funding decisions. So thank you again for taking this time to join us today. I hope I can share with you some of our insights that we have learned along the way. So what you will learn today. So first of all, it's important to think about how to find funding, right? So we will give you the tools that you need to find funding and also explain the importance of understanding the eligibility criteria. And of course, we will also help you think like a research funder. As a company, we speak a lot with all the people that we serve, so the researchers, the research offices, and of course also the research funders. And so we would like to help you today to think how they would think. So put yourself in the shoes of the research funder to improve your chances of success when it comes to research funding. And then finally, to share some communication strategies that would help you, whether it's to do with your grant writing or any kind of writing for that matter. So, and again, I'm also very happy that we partnered with Inago for this webinar, and given that they have such a long track record of helping with science communication. So let's look at some numbers, right? I used some lottery balls here to look at some numbers. And what are these numbers and why are we using lottery balls? Mainly because actually, so a lot of researchers that we speak with feel that sometimes research funding feels a little bit like a lottery. And when it comes to the success rate of research funding, so indeed, so Horizon Europe, for example, has about 15% success rate, the NIH about 20%, and the NSF about 25%. And if you're based in Germany, the numbers are a little bit better, or the odds are a little bit better, so it's more around 30%. But I think what's also really important to keep in mind that this is an average. So if you are not so good at this game, you can very well be below this average. Or if you think about it from a strategic perspective, I think there's a lot of opportunity there that you could improve your odds of success to above that 30% even. So let's go and look at how we can improve our success rate. So let's look at the roadmap for research funding. So how would you go about if you were to apply for research funding? So I think there are essentially some basic steps, some generic steps. And so we will cover each of these generic steps and all the things that you need to keep in mind as you write, as you put forward your grant proposal. So first of all, of course, you need to find the right funding. You need to confirm that you're eligible, and then you also need to be sure that it's not just eligible, but that you are also suitable for this funding. Then once you have figured out the basics, then it's time to start planning, start writing, and then also saving a lot of time for editing, and also then finally to submit the grant. So I mentioned that we will look at the funding from or grant writing from the perspective of a funder. So let's look at it from the perspective of a funder. So what happens after you submit your grant? right? So this is a rough overview of what happens after you submit your grant. Well, first of all, there's usually an administrator at the funder that will look at it from a very basic criteria. And so you need to meet these basic criteria. So first of all, you need to be sure that you are eligible for the grant. That of course you have submitted on the deadline and complete, and that the grant needs to be complete. And then also you go through the review. Once you go through this, then you will go through the review. And this review is usually done by experts who are more familiar with your work. And there could be also an interview process, and then finally success. And you can see that the reason why this is a funnel is because at every step, there is a attrition of applicants. And so there gets less and less, and that's why usually you get a low percentage between, submission to the ones that finally are successful in getting that funding. So one of the very basic things is actually this eligibility criteria, because if you don't even meet that eligibility criteria, it could be the basic eligibility or the very specific eligibility, but nevertheless, it is eligibility. And if you then go ahead and make an application, even regardless of this or disregarding this, is actually a waste of your time. And also, unfortunately, a waste of time for the funders, right? So let's think about it from this perspective, from the perspective of time. Let's try not to waste anybody's time. So how could you then find the right funding? So we're looking at now step one, finding the funding that's relevant for you. So how would you go about doing this? So these are, one thing that we like to do as a company is always that we think about the first principles, right? So we'd like to think, how do we do something? And not necessarily the actual detail, but really these are the tools that you will need to be able to apply this across different funding, different applications. But so generically speaking, you can always rely on so one way, of course, is networking with your colleagues, what they have applied for, especially also your mentors and more senior colleagues, because they may have a lot of more experience when it comes to funding. But one thing to keep also in mind is that the one thing we do know from our experience of talking with a lot of researchers is that researchers tend to share that information after they have been successful. And so if it's a current opportunity, they may not share that with you because, well, they may also be applying. So keep that in mind, there's a possibility. And where else could you find funding information? Then, of course, society. So if you usually, as a researcher, you are a member of a society. So whether it's it's usually to do with your scientific expertise, right? And that society usually also is a very good resource when it comes to pointing you in the right direction for research funding. And of course, your university. Your university and your research managers, these guys they do this professionally, I think, looking for funding, helping you. So it's a very good point, a very good starting point to find out more information about research funding. So that's always a resource. Sometimes I think it may be underutilized. So we always encourage our webinar participants to really explore what you have at your fingertip. Really, like, it's not that far. It's part of your university, and their mandate is to help you. And then we also, one thing that we do know, I did not mention back in those previous slides, is Google. Why is it that we do not recommend necessarily Googling funding information? Why it's not really useful? Well, the reason actually is because of the way Google, the way it is designed. So Google is very good for navigational searches, right? So if you know where you want to go, so if you know a particular funder already, then it's a really good place to use to say, hey, if you're in the UK or if you are actually Wellcome Trust is actually open for most countries these days. So yeah, if you want to say find funding from the Wellcome Trust, you can just quickly type in Wellcome Trust, and then you will land on their website, and then you can find their funding calls. And the thing is, this is particularly good if you know the funder. But if you do not know the funder, or even if you know the funder, but the funder has very extensive funding calls, it becomes really difficult. And the reason is because the complexity of the funding calls, and also often these databases of the funders are not particularly designed from the perspective of the user, but more from the perspective of the administrator. And so they make it very tedious to go through those databases. And don't forget also that, even the one of the complexities has also to do with the moving deadlines. So Google, you can use it, of course, especially it's good if you know where you want to go. So if you know exactly the funder that you're looking for, but if you're not sure, the best thing is actually professional services. And so as a professional research funding database, Scientify Research, this is what we do. We help you find funding, and in a way that makes the information very structured and easily for you to fit your criteria that you need. So when it goes to the database, and so that was one example. So Scientify Research is one funding database. But back to your university, university also has, may have actually subscriptions for many different databases. And then it's up to you to decide which is your favorite, which is most useful. But definitely we recommend using databases just because the research funding eligibility is complex and can be, it's complex, right? So databases make it a lot easier for you. So once you have, find the funding, it's also very important to confirm your eligibility. And what do we mean by confirming the eligibility? So essentially, actually, when it comes to the eligibility, what we have shown, so our funding database, we're really good at helping you to go through the basic criteria. What are some of the basic criteria? So funders usually have very specific location requirements. And so especially so from the national funders, they may only fund the location, so where they are based. But there's also a lot of collaboration funding, and so that you may not be aware of. And then they would be open for different locations. Others may be a career stage, and so it may be that it's a funding. I understand that in the participants today, we have all different stages. Some of you are students, some of you are postdocs, some of you are already PIs. And so there are different stages, and obviously, a PhD student and the PI shouldn't really be on the same kind of a competitive field. And so funders usually specify who can actually apply and at what career stage this funding is intended for. And then, of course, there's academic disciplines, depending on what the funder is seeking to, what is the mission of the funder. And of course, sometimes for some funding, there is a citizenship requirement. And so those are the basic requirements. But also, so back to the basic requirements. So how we as a database can help, and this is common with many databases. I think ours, of course, so it's quite is very specific, and so it really teases out all the requirements. And you can look at it actually from the other side. So one is the eligibility criteria, so what the funder will fund, but you can also look at it from what is it that you want to be funded for, or who are you? What are your funding needs? And so with this, we can then match the funder's requirements and your funding needs to find the right funding for yourself. So now we have discussed the basic criteria, but there's actually a lot more complexity to this, and it may not be so easy to capture that. Actually, it is not so easy to capture that in a database format, and this is when reading. So at some point, you still need to read. You still need to read what the funder is saying. So you need to read carefully. Is their call? They may have very specific requirements. So some may say, okay, you have to be X number of years after your PhD. Others say you have to be within a certain time period of starting your own research lab. Many different requirements, and sometimes even the institution may be different. different. And so it's always pays to talk with your research office and talk with your research office team early. Time is of the essence here. The funding calls are usually not open for very long. So, you know, the sooner you find out, the better, and the more time you have to prepare. Now, so we have talked about eligibility and more from the perspective of the funders, what they are looking to fund, but you should also look at from your perspective, is this actually good? Right. So for one thing is that, you know, how much time it is to apply for a grant. It's always time is probably our most valuable resource, and it's always an opportunity cost, whether you're going to spend time doing X or you wanted to spend time doing Y. So how much money are they actually offering, and for how long? Is it a little bit of money and they're asking you to put in hours and hours of work? Then maybe it's not worth it. Whereas if it's a lot of money and it may be asking for extensive work, but you know that may be worth it, as in the payoff may be there. Other things to also keep in mind is intellectual property rights. Do you as a researcher get to keep the IP of your research? And also for you as a researcher, publishing is very important for your academic track record. So are you allowed to publish the work that's funded? And also, what are the grant reporting requirements? If it's very extensive, maybe it's going to be taking up a lot of your time. So even if you're successful, it's actually going to cost you more time to in terms of reporting, and then that may not be worth it. And as a word of caution, funding from tobacco industry. Obviously, we know today that tobacco or smoking is detrimental for your health, and part of the legacy of this is how the industry has manipulated research back like many years ago. But nevertheless, so what it has led to is that some funders today actually would not even fund researchers that have taken money from tobacco industry. So it's something you need to keep in mind. So yeah, read the funding call properly and think it through. What does this mean for your career in the long term? So now, let's continue. So we have talked about confirming the suitability. So that's great, right? So we have confirmed the suitability. And so now it's time to then really plan your research. Oh, before you even plan, so one more thing about confirming suitability. Yes. So you have thought about the suitability from your side, but it's very important. One final thing that you really need to look at, maybe even this is the first thing. What is the proposed research? How does your proposed research actually advance the funder's mission? Because if your research does not advance the funder's mission, doesn't matter if you meet the basic eligibility criteria, doesn't matter if their funding is great, they give you plenty of money. It's very unlikely that it will be funded. So I use this imagery here is, if it doesn't fit, it doesn't fit. You can't really squeeze it in and try to make it fit. So if a funder says, they want this research to have immediate patient impact, this is just an example, and you are a basic researcher, maybe this is not the best funding for you. So think about the funder's mission and think about how you're going to advance it. If you don't think it's going to meet that criteria, maybe best to avoid it. But having said all this, one thing is always to keep in mind is that actually when we speak with funders, they are very open actually. One thing they say is that we always encourage potential applicants to write to us and ask us questions. And people usually don't. So I think there is an opportunity there. It's definitely okay to write to the funder and ask, of course, in a way that is polite, in a way that is informative. So you give them enough information to provide you, or ask a very clear question and enough information so that they can answer you properly. And all that actually indicates that, you are a thoughtful person, you are a thoughtful person that will also translate to your research. And so therefore, you can make it's an opportunity to make a good impression for yourself. So continuing now, that's plan. So now you have decided, you have found the right funding. That's great, that you are the perfect person. And now it's time to actually execute that, right? And with any execution of any idea, planning is very, very important. So let's look at what actually is needed in the planning stage. So you need to read that call, that funding call properly, right? You need to know, so what do they want to find? What do they want to fund? Who do they want to fund? And what kind of, maybe they have very specific areas they are looking for, or maybe they're looking for something very broad that they don't actually have a very specific agenda. And but whatever it is, you need to figure this out and do your homework. It could also be meaning that you need to look at previous successful recipients of the funding, and then you can gauge what is their research and why was it that they have been funded, and then you can get an insight into the process of the funder, and you want to replicate that success, right? You want to stand out, you want to be different, you want to be the one that says, hey, I'm going to be worthy of your money. And again, back to the research office in your university, a very good resource, and talk with them because they may have a lot more information that you will need. And also, sometimes a funding call could be a limited submission, and limited submission as in they only want one application from a particular university. And so it's really important to understand who would that be, right? And so you need to get into the workflow of your university's research office. And even if they don't have a limited submission, great. But it never hurts to talk with your university. Also, take some time to explore the submission system because the submission system may have some specific requirements. They may want your CV a certain way. They may want your information to be presented a certain way. They may require you to pre-register all these things. So explore that submission system, take your time, prepare yourself. Double check inside the requirements. Do they need preliminary results? This is a common question that we sometimes get. So preliminary results, what happens if I don't have any? Well, it's a bit of chicken and egg, right? But a good thing for those of you who may be starting out writing grants is that there are actually funding that's designed for this career stage that you don't have the preliminary results. And so they will give you some kind of startup funding that allows you to then generate that preliminary results that can go on to apply for extensive, large funding. So, but it's good to know, you need to know, do they want preliminary results for this application or do they not want it? And sometimes they may even say, we do not want any, do not bring any. And so, but be sure that you know what is it that's required. The other thing, of course, is what else is required? Maybe they need references from your mentors. Maybe they need signatures from your department head. All these, just keep that in mind. What is it that you need to complete this process? It is extensive, and the better you plan, the less surprises you will have for the deadline. The budget, of course, is very important. What is a reasonable budget? And do they cover indirect costs? And this is actually going back to your university research office. And what their requirements are. And indirect cost, of course, is a part of, is important. It's inevitable, and it's a part of the funding that keeps the infrastructure of the university running. And you may not be able to apply for any funding if they don't supply the right amount of indirect costs. So it's very important to talk to your research office. And another thing that's very important for success is to think about the review process. And this is something that we also do a lot in terms of highlighting the review process to help researchers like you understand what's actually going to happen once you submit. Who's going to assess that grant? Is it going to be experts who know my work very, very well? Or is it it's more likely that it's somebody that's related, somebody that is reasonably educated and understands of your particular area, but the odds of them understanding every single part of the intricacies of your research may be low. And so to keep that in mind, so who's actually assessing this? What kind of system do they have? And then you can be able to write a better application. Right. So it's about any kind of communication. And I think the colleagues at Enago would agree that, it's about who are you talking to, right? So if you know who you're talking to, who's your target audience, it's much easier to write and be able to write something that they can understand. And understanding is really important, because if they don't understand, they probably will not fund you. So you want them to understand. Now, okay, so understanding the review process. We talked a lot about that already. Let's look at it in more detail, right? So, we talked about the eligibility, right? And so somebody in the administration of the funder will go through and look at the eligibility. Are you eligible? If not, they will not send it for external peer review. And then they will send your paper or send your application for external peer review. This is where you can see my publishing background is coming, it's creeping in. But let's focus, it's grant writing. But principles are quite similar. So they will send it for some external peer review. And think about it also then from the perspective of the reviewer. They are probably being asked to review something that they may not have in-depth understanding. And so if you go into the details, a lot of jargon, you may lose them, and they may not then rate your application favorably. So keep that in mind. And then usually what happens, there could be a panel, and the panel, depending on the funding scheme, some are very transparent about who is actually on their panel. And so, for example, the European, the ERC grants, and depending on which section of the ERC grants, they would say also who exactly is within that panel. And so the panel would then go through those reviewers' comments, and then they would discuss your application and decide whether this will be funded, or whether this will go into maybe the interview stage before they decide who's actually going to get funded. So, but the good thing is that if you know who the panels may be, it's an opportunity for you to review their work and see their interests and try to frame your research in a language that they would be understanding, but also finding it very interesting and should be funded. So there's quite a lot of strategy to this, and so it pays some time for you when planning to think about the possible structure of the review process. And if you're not sure, actually, feel free also to ask, right? Ask the administrators at the funder what may be the review process that you can help better prepare your application. Now, speaking of better preparing your application, so this is an example of some of the reviewer questions. So getting hold of reviewer questions could be very important, could be very helpful, because you can then put yourself again inside the shoes of the reviewer, like how would they be assessing your research? And so NIH, this is an example from the NIH, and they have now introduced this simplified peer review framework that's coming into effect in, I think, 2025. So the applications that's starting to be submitted later this year will be going through this funding, this assessment criteria. And for those of you who are not in the US, NIH actually has a very extensive funding also internationally. And one of the things that we do at Scientify Research is that we make it also very easy for you to identify which of those NIH funding is actually open for international applicants. So it's one reason why Scientify Research is very useful for you. But let's look at what they are looking for, right? And so as a reviewer for the NIH, you will be asked these 3 points to look at. You want to look at the importance of the research. So it should be innovative, it should be significant. And you will look at the rigor and feasibility. What is rigor and feasibility? Is actually how you plan to go about doing that, address that question that you have. So what is your methodology? And is this methodology appropriate for that question? Are you going to be able to answer that question based on those experiments that you propose? And then, of course, one thing that's important to realize, of course, I'm sure you know that by now, right? We are not operating as standalone entities. Our success actually depended a lot on those infrastructure around us. And so what they will be asking the reviewers to also look at is, so do you have the right academic track record? I think, have you demonstrated this? Do you have experience in this area? You know, it may be a great idea, but if you never had any experience at all, are you going to really be able to deliver what you have promised? And the other thing, of course, is the environment around you. If you need large equipment, if you need lab space, are these things around you? Are your institutions, the institution you're in, does it have those resources to help you facilitate your research and what you have promised in your proposal? So keep that in mind. Those are the things. So this is how they would decide whether they will fund you. And then looking at more detail from the perspective of the funder and the reviewer. So, you know, they need to understand your proposal. So it's really important that the language is understandable and communication, right? Because when people understand, they are more likely to recognize that this is important. And if they don't understand and compare to the applications that they do understand, they're more likely to favor those. So you want to be in that pool where they understand and they find it interesting. And back to the mission of the funder, they need to always advance that mission, whatever it is, whether it's to cure cancer or whether it is to slow down aging, whatever it is. It's important to know that your research and the research you propose and the funder's mission, they match each other. Yeah. And then also to demonstrate to them that, you know, not only do you have this idea, but you can really deliver. So you are the right person, right? So you have shown in your track record that you have done this before. This is how you planned to be successful at doing it again. And then also you have that right environment. Yeah. So now let's look at some reasons. So this is also using NIH information. NIH is great for that. Very good for giving you very transparent and a lot of information. So what are some of the reasons that grants are rejected? So this is actually just asking reviewers why some of the applications are not funded. What are some? It's 80%, right? Do you remember the numbers? Like, so NIH funding is about 20% success rate. That means 80% have unfortunately met one of these, right? So either they don't have original ideas, or maybe their scientific rationale was not as logical, or the way it was presented, what did not feel like was logical. They may have proposed some methodology, but they don't actually have that experience. So maybe it's unfocused. I think a lot of the time, you know, you can tell an unfocused research in the language. So if people are not sure about what they are talking about, they can use very vague language that then actually shows that they don't know what they are trying to convey. And reviewers, of course, will pick that up very quickly. Yeah. So, and don't forget the other thing. One thing that's actually very interesting. If you not only do you not give enough detail, but if you say you want to do too much, if you say it's unrealistic, basically it's unrealistic. You promise to deliver to cure cancer tomorrow. You know, that would be unrealistic. And so that would also be another reason why they would say, hey, we're not going to fund this. So keep in mind those reasons. And it's not to say to focus on them, right? It's always good to know where you want to go and focus on where you want to go. But it's important to keep in mind that these are some of the pitfalls that others have made, mistakes others have made, and you can learn from them and not to repeat those same mistakes. And so then it comes to the writing stage. So you have planned all this and let's go and write. Yes, so the grant writing is essentially 3 steps. What, right? What is your scientific question? That scientific question should be important, should be impactful, should be making a difference. So important to keep that in mind. And also as you write, to always have that, like this pinned up on your desk. What is it that you are trying to achieve and what you want to convey? And then you will move in that direction as you write. And how? So, okay. Why is this important? I think why for me is almost like even the more fundamental, right? Because there's no point just because something is it's great to know, right? It doesn't mean that you should know. So why does this make a difference? What is the impact of this research that you propose, and how it fits with the funder's mission? Always go back to the funder's mission, that what you're doing is really going to advance that funder's mission, right? Because they're investing in you. What are they trying to achieve? How are you going to use that money to achieve that goal? And when it comes to professional grant writing, and so our friends at Enago, of course, have a lot of services around this, and to really give you that edge. And so, of course, the Enago is experts at science communication, and so your ideas and have your ideas, and Enago would be able to help you put that into the words that the funder may be looking for, and in terms of communicating that. And it really saves you time to actually have an expert who does this all the time to then tailor your proposal. And especially, the funder has very specific requirements, and then that proposal can be worked in such a way that it will meet what the funder has been asking for. So. Yes, and don't forget there is a discount for the attendees of the webinar, and so I think it's Grant 10, easy to remember. And I'm sure our colleagues in Enago will also send the slides around later, so you will have access to all the discount codes and all the solutions that are offered here. Now, how? Going back to the grant writing, so how it's important to demonstrate that it's not just an idea, it's not just a great idea, but that you also have a realistic way of demonstrating that idea So yeah, this is how how you demonstrate that the methods that you decide to use is appropriate and is going to help you actually find out the goal that you have for your research. And also important contingency plans. That this is not just a one-way street, that if you get to a certain point, then it doesn't go anywhere. You need to be able to make changes if you need to. And good grant writing also, keep in mind, one of the things that we mentioned earlier was about unrealistic goals, and one of the things also unrealistic costing, right? So you need to demonstrate that the costs that you propose is actually realistic. And also you need to know what are the eligible costs. You can't just write anything into this grant. So you need to know, first of all, what do they cover? Do they cover salary? Do they cover your equipment? Do they cover your lab space? Do they cover your travel? What are the things that you can actually write into the grant? And if you can, you should actually, because that would help you. The reason why the funding is there is because it's there to help you meet those goals. And so if you say, for example, one of the goals is for training of your staff or training of your students, and then you should definitely write in some costing that would help facilitate the training of your students, whatever that you think might be. So have a good read through of the eligible costs and put in the realistic amount. And again, your research office is a very good resource for you to understand. And of course, first of all, is the guidelines from the funder, but also your research office can give you what are some of the so for example, for salaries, right? So if you have not written a grant before and you want to include somebody's salary, a salary is actually not just the amount that the person receives, but also the social benefits and all the other costs around it. And so you need to know what are these extra on top of what the person receives. So your research office is a very good resource for you. So the validity of any research, we don't forget statistics is really important, right? So you need to plan your experiment with enough statistical power, and the statistician is a very good person who can help you. And Inago also has a very good services in this front. So Inago has thought about all the things that you could possibly need. So professional statistical support services is also available for you. So, and then think about all the other components. And so sometimes it may seem like not just another place. And sometimes, it's also important to keep those in mind, because everything, to pay attention to detail is actually a way of demonstrating that you can do research properly. And so if they have a requirement to talk about open science, or how you plan to share the data, how you plan to communicate your science, or talk about diversity in your research group, and then if you fail to address this properly or sufficiently, doesn't matter if you actually have proposed a great research, and people may look at this and go, you forgot this. And when reviewers are busy, when reviewers are looking for ways to not fund, given that they have a pool of funding that they cannot give to everybody, then this is when you may lose out. So think about all the different details, and also if they have any requirements for open science, data sharing, whatever it is, that you have addressed this sufficiently. And sometimes it doesn't mean that you need to be doing this all yourself, right? And some grants may be very open for you to bring in professional services that would help you with this. So know what the funder will fund, and also think about, it's important to realize, of course, it's good to bring different expertise in to be successful together. And so sometimes it may be worthwhile to say, okay, if you want to demonstrate impact, maybe there is a company that is really good at science communication, and maybe you want to work with them to facilitate your science communication. So keep those things in mind, and really to think about how can you deliver the most impact for that funding that the funder is proposing. So, and also, yes, and Inago has also training academy, so to can help you in terms of the training that you may need. And so there's a lot of webinars and workshops that would help with the needs of your particular application. Now, continuing with the language part, and of course, our friends at Inago is experts at this. Generally speaking, when it comes to the language of an application, I suggest, and also this is from experience of handling for many years scientific peer review for many different journals. It's really important to keep it simple. So, and especially these days, I think so time has changed dramatically over the past few years. People's attention spans are getting shorter, and the ability to read long sentences is also getting worse, for better or worse. That's just the way it is. So keep it simple. If you have one concept, keep it to one sentence. If you can say it with less words, it's probably going to be more effective at communicating it. So try to condense it, but also really only focus on the what you need. Keep it lean, and also use the right lingo that can help you demonstrate whether you know your field or you don't know your field. Some words are better used as an abbreviation, others are not, and so if you know the difference, that's also a very good way to demonstrate to the peers who are reviewing, that would know, okay, you know what you're talking about. But conversely, if you don't know the lingo and you try to use it wrongly, or you use it but you use it wrongly, that can also go against you. And so you need to judge the right amount of language, what is the right language. When you have multiple authors, this is actually a very common problem. Somebody needs to come back and check. right? The consistency with the terms. Sometimes people use one term and sometimes another group uses a different term, and it can cause confusion to the reviewer, and just sometimes, the brain just doesn't process anymore. So try to keep it consistent also especially when you have multiple authors, and also how you format it, right? Keeping the format to be consistent. Try to use active and present tense, and so that it sounds like a lively piece of work to read. And very importantly is that, when you have a message, repeat it. You may have said it in paragraph 1, but you may want to say it again in paragraph 4. Because people, one, may not read it, may forget what they have read, and this repetition helps them understand what they are trying to read, right? So keep it simple. And the other thing is about communication, right? And communication is not only just about words. And so it's also about the whole presentation. So how did you format your application? Is there room actually for formatting? Maybe it's a kind of application that is only text, but maybe there are some that allow you to use images and figures and tables to supplement what you're saying. And this is a great opportunity because the image can actually say so much more and convey your message so much better. And if they allow videos, some grants definitely allow videos, and it's a great opportunity also to show your audience who you are. So all these are great. Think about how you want to make that impression and the story that you want to tell of you as a researcher, and why you're so passionate about this research, and why it's so important for them to fund this research and to make it happen. So in terms of presentation and storytelling, Inago also has services when it comes to helping you with graphical abstracts, video abstracts, and to really transform that research into some beautiful imagery that would linger in the minds of your reviewer, and in a favorable way, of course. So now that you have written it, you have planned and written your application, it's time to edit. And quite often the editing can actually take longer than the writing. So you should always start editing it yourself, right? Because you don't want to give a piece of work that is not complete and expect other people to edit for you. Well, of course, if you it depends on if it's you're asking for a paid service, maybe so then it's okay, but it's still it's in your best interest to actually edit it yourself, because you need to first understand what you have written in order for others to be able to help you. Right. And so getting that feedback from other scientists, feedback from peers, maybe from your research office, from a professional service like Inago, all this will be really helpful to pull together that information and really help you to align that strategy that you're trying to convey inside that application. Sometimes these applications can go for 10, 20 pages. And by the end, sometimes you feel like what is actually is a story, right? So somebody needs to make sure that this is a whole coherent story. What's really important is time. So you need time for all this to happen. It takes time for everybody, and they may not be able to do it immediately. So you need to give everybody enough time. And so when it comes to editing services, Inago, of course, can help you save time, improve that coherence that we just talked about. Is the story actually flowing, or do you have something that's, somehow your mind got distracted and something came in and it's actually not necessary for the story? And also, does what you propose actually still align with that requirement of the funding body? So Inago can help you to match all this. And there are many tools available, and I think these days there's a lot of webinars about using AI for different purposes, including in academic research. So when it comes to the tools available, of course, Inago has the Trinka AI, and we also did an interview with the product manager at Trinka AI. So there are many tools out there. And the funders are actually very liberal also about this. Some say that you need to declare, some don't say you don't need, some say you don't need to actually declare anything. But what they always remind you of is that you are the author and you are responsible for your work. And so if there's any plagiarism, if there's any inaccurate information, anything like this that is detrimental to the scientific integrity of your writing, then you are responsible. So AI could be a good tool. It could be useful, yes. But at the end of the day, always remember that you are the author and you are responsible for that work. And also, I think as a caveat, I think people realize these days, and for us, it's also very clear. When people use AI, sometimes maybe because AI is not quite sufficiently advanced, you can tell that it takes away the individuality, and it sounds in a way generic. And the whole point of these applications is actually you want to stand out from the crowd. You want to be that amazing researcher that they want to fund because your idea and the way you can execute that idea is actually going to advance that mission of the funder. And so if you use a tool that just makes you look like everybody else, you're actually doing yourself a disservice. So keeping this in mind, use the tool, but you need to be sure that what you're writing is still making you stand out. Think about it. Does it make you stand out? Does it make you actually a good a researcher that they want to fund, or you're just going to be like everybody else? So that would be my suggestion. So submitting, wow. So, we're getting to the submission stage. That's always, it's a really great feeling. And also afterwards. And so, but before you get to click that submit button, make sure you give yourself plenty of time. Also, a reason is because quite often these online systems, they may be down before the deadline. So you want to be sure that, maybe give yourself at least a day before the deadline to have everything in the system. And this is actually from personal experience. Always check for that confirmation email from the funder. And also, often you will have collaborators. It's a great opportunity to send that email also to your collaborators so that everybody knows that this is really submitted. Because if you haven't quite, if you have everything in the system, but you haven't quite clicked that submit button, it's not there. So you need to be sure you do everything properly and check for that confirmation email from the funder. And if you don't receive that confirmation email, after the deadline, you should definitely contact the funder and ask them. And they are human about this. They will check for you, right? But if you wait till after the review period, and then it's too late. So check. Okay, so I want to just also illustrate that your research and you are really, really important part of a grant application. But what's also very important is your environment, your mentor, your colleagues, your research manager, your interaction with the funder and the people, your reviewers, who are your peers. So there are a lot of other people around this, and the more you can utilize the resource available to you, the more you can demonstrate, the better you can demonstrate how you work in this environment, the more likely that you will be successful with your grant writing. So we just have a few more resources for you. So that is the take-home message. Think about the team. If you're interested in more events like this from Scientify Research and from Inago, you can always sign up to our grant, our event alerts here. So here's a QR code. And essentially you can just, let us know you're interested. And every time we have any kind of funding webinars, and we would alert you. Actually, we have one coming up on October 31st. So if you go to our website, you can look at our event calendar. And in that webinar, we would be talking about AI and grant writing. We have a special invited speaker for that as well. And for those of you who may be interested to use Scientify research to find the funding that's relevant for you, you may want to take advantage of our free trial. This is a 1-week free trial, and all you need to give us is your email address, and that's it. You just need to have an account, and therefore you need an email address to be able to access this account. Yeah. But if you want to have more than just 1 week, you can, and you need a little bit more information. And so you have we have a discount code here, and with this discount code, you can then, I think it's Inago 100, if I recall correctly. Yes, it is. So I had to just move my display a little bit. If you go to this, scan this QR code and you put in, choose the 1-month option, you put Inago 100 in, and you have a week to do this, you will have free access to Scientify research for 1 month. And for this, you do need to put in your credit card information. And you also, as part of the Inago community, if you would like to have a 1-year subscription of Scientify research, because as you know, funding comes, not only once, but it comes all throughout the whole year. So it's good to have a yearly subscription, and so you can have a 20% off using the Inago-2024 code, and this is valid for 2 weeks. And yeah, you get 20% off for a whole year. And we also help you. And so if you would like to have more hands-on help, you would like a consultation, we can help you with a consultation to look for funding that's specific for your needs. And this also comes with access to the funding database for 1 month. If you already have a grant that you're writing right now, but you would like to have a more strategic review, and this is really just a strategic review. So looking at how you fit with the funder, how can you communicate with your funder, and giving you high-level feedback. We're happy to do that for you. This is you can scan this QR code and book a time with us. If you would like to have more extensive grant writing service, like the whole package, and then we would highly recommend the services from our friends at Inago. And there's also a coupon here, Grant 10, to get some discount for this services today. And now I'm really happy. Thank you so much for your attention. I'm really happy to take any questions. Let me see if there's any questions in the chat already. Oh, and of course, additional resources. And so from the Inago Academy, always very useful. And let's see if we have any questions. I have a question here that says, are there particular websites, organizations that provide funding opportunity ever? Sometimes you see institutional research office may not be able to provide adequate information. Yes, yeah, it's true. So sometimes, well, actually, it's a matter of capacity, right? The research office staff, there's only so many, and there are so many researchers in the university, and they may not be able to provide you with always the direct feedback immediately. And also the resources, if they don't have access to a funding database, they tend to have more of a static list. And that static list, what happens is that, of course, information can become outdated. The pages that the funder can move. And so, yeah, it becomes a lot more cumbersome to keep that information, to go through all those pages. And so, yeah, try to access a funding database, even using our free trial is really useful. And also, I didn't show this, but I think also what's very important is this tracking, because there's a lot of information and the information changes. And so what we have is also we have tools that help you. So you can, for example, when you find the right grants, you can then also add it to your as a favorite. So you have a list of favorites. You can also add it to your calendar. And so, yeah, all the things that help you to manage that time and prepare sufficiently for that grant. And I have more questions. And how does scientific research ensure that the data is updated? And we work very hard. We work very hard to make sure that we update the information. We have different technology available, of course. We have people and technology. That's what we do. We always combine the two, just because, yeah, we still need a human to make sure everything is right. But we also need to be more efficient. There are some things that the machine can do quite well, and there are some things that the human can do better. So we combine this, and then we make sure that all the funding information is updated. We check it regularly. We look for the deadlines. Yeah. What are the common mistakes that one should avoid while writing a funding proposal? I would say there are so many common mistakes. I think being too wordy could be one. And not knowing your target audience is another one. Because if you're just writing something and you think it's not a paper, right? A grant is not the same as a journal paper. They were like, that's clear, I hope. And I think actually I didn't mention this. When it comes to also the keywords that funders use, they're very, very different to a journal paper. The funder keywords tend to be a lot more generic. And so, yeah, keep in mind that there are different processes. I think that could be one thing that confusion among people. And so when you're writing a journal paper, usually you use very specific terms. You go into a lot of detail, and then the things that the reviewer for a grant is not the same as a reviewer for your journal paper. So you may miss a lot of the communication won't be right. It's like you're going too specific, and you may miss actually what is the impact of what you're doing. And you may be clear to you that this is so important, but it's not so clear to other people. So the validity of the coupon service, Inago services, I think I will let, I think Inago will send this around. How do I understand the mission of the funder? Well, I think usually funders are very transparent with what their mission is. So they will explain what they are trying to address, whether they are trying to address poverty, are they trying to address sustainability, are they trying to address health, are they trying to address education? Like they usually would tell you. And within that mission, and then they will talk about also how they support research within that mission. Maybe they want to support junior researchers, and or they want to support funding. The mission is complex, and so they require transdisciplinary teams. They want global collaborations. So they will be very specific. So yeah, really to read what the funder is saying. And of course, we at Scientify Research and Inago, we are happy to also help you. So my colleagues at Inago say that, we have no more questions. So thank you so much for your time. It was really a pleasant experience. I hope that, yeah, you feel free to get in touch with us. And we are, yes, I have a slide. Wow. Well, get in touch with us. And of course, the Inago team will send this around. Feel free to get in touch. We'd love to hear from you and love to help you. So thank you. Have a great day. And yeah, thank you, everybody.